You know, after studying languages for more than 50 years and using dozens of them for study, work, and travel, people often ask me for the secret. They want to know, which app should I use? Which method works best? Or what trick finally makes things click? And the truth is, most of what people worry about in language learning doesn't really matter. While most of what actually matters, almost nobody talks about. So in this video, I want to share with you what I've learned, not from theory, but from a lifetime of learning languages while traveling and living around the world. Just to be clear, you don't have to learn 30 languages. That was my path, not a recommendation. What is useful is understanding why some languages stay with us and why others seem to quietly disappear. So let's start with a few things that don't matter nearly as much as people think. The first one is talent. A lot of people say to me, you must have a natural talent for languages. I don't really see it that way. In fact, most polyglots do not consider that a compliment, since it belittles the amount of time and effort necessary to learn multiple languages. It's usually not about natural talent, rather developed talent through hard work and the passion to keep on going. It requires discipline and consistency over time, showing up again and again, even when you feel awkward, even when progress feels slow. Talent plays a much smaller role than people think. The second is perfect pronunciation. A lot of learners stay quiet because they're afraid of mispronouncing things. Here's the reality. Pronunciation improves because you speak, not before. Some languages, honestly, I picked up very easily. For example, Colombian Spanish or Brazilian Portuguese, Polish, just to name a few. The flow and melody came quite naturally. But other languages were a completely different story. One of the best examples was Vietnamese, which I found very challenging at the beginning. The tones and what felt like an endless number of new vowel sounds with diphthongs, triphthongs, etc. That challenge actually forced me to change how I learn. I had to slow down, listen more carefully, repeat constantly. A lot of that happened as I rode a motorcycle across the country numerous times, listening, repeating, adjusting again and again. Over time, that kind of focus, listening, and repeating paid off. And today I can use both Southern and Northern dialects of the language, including their pronunciations and accents, vocabulary, not because I waited for perfect pronunciation, but because I kept speaking and refining along the way. Number 3, the need to master grammar first. Grammar matters, but not in the way most people think. I don't see grammar as something you have to completely master before you speak. I see it more as a roadmap, a way of understanding how a language actually functions. Most of the grammar I've learned didn't come from sitting down with a textbook and memorizing rules. It came from practice. I'll run into a sentence, use it, hear it, repeat it, and then at some point I think, wait, why does it work like that? That curiosity is usually when I look at the grammar. These days, I'll often ask the latest version of ChatGPT to explain the sentence I've encountered, not in abstract terms, but in relation to something I've actually tried to say. That kind of grammar sticks with me because it's connected to real usage. This has definitely been the case in my recent study of Tagalog Filipino. Its grammar is far more complex than its Malay-based cousins. I made a video about that, especially the way focus, voice, and sentence structure work. And then there's Persian or Farsi. The language is not necessarily complex on the surface, but very different from European languages and how ideas are structured and expressed. In both cases, grammar only became meaningful after I was already working with real sentences. So for me, grammar isn't the starting point. It's a tool, something you use to make sense of patterns you've already begun to notice. Grammar should support communication, not replace it. Now, number 4, the perfect method. People spend years searching for the perfect system to learn a language, the perfect app, the perfect book, the one method that finally makes everything work. There isn't one. What actually matters is finding a method, or more accurately, a mix of methods that you'll use even on tired days, boring days, and travel days. In my own learning, what has worked best has always been a combination of methods. Sometimes it's structured study, looking at patterns, key grammar points, or sentence structures. Sometimes it's repetition, reusing the same sentences until they become automatic. Other times it's listening, podcasts, conversations, or just having the language in my ears while taking a walk or traveling in a foreign country. And often it's speaking early and perfectly and letting real interaction shape what I focus on next. That's why I recently published a separate video on the 10 language learning methods that have been effective for me. Not because everyone should use the same methods, but because experimenting with different approaches is usually far more effective than committing to just one. There's no perfect system because one size does not fit all. We all have different strengths and weaknesses, different learning preferences, and different ways of staying engaged. So my advice is simple. Try different methods. Combine what works for you and let your routine evolve over time. Consistency matters far more than finding something that looks elegant on paper. Now let's take a look at what actually matters. This is where things start to shift. Number 1, purpose. Every language that has stayed with me had a reason, a place I wanted to go, a person I wanted to talk to, a culture I wanted to understand. When a language has a purpose, motivation almost stops being a problem. Knowing why you want to learn a language and how you will actually plan to use it helps guide everything else. It shapes what you study, the vocabulary you focus on, the kind of sentences you practice. It prepares you for real use of the language, not some abstract idea of fluency. Without a clear purpose, it's very easy to lose direction. With one, even slow progress feels meaningful because you're moving towards something real. Number 2 is about emotion. Languages learned only in the head don't last long. Languages tied to emotion do. Embarrassment, friendship, curiosity, even fear sometimes. Emotion is what tells your brain, this matters. Remember this. And once you understand that, it changes how you study and how you practice. Instead of asking, what should I learn next? You start asking, what situations actually matter to me? You focus less on perfect coverage and more on meaningful moments. You practice sentences you might really use. You replay conversations that felt awkward. You remember words because they were connected to a person, a place, or a feeling. Emotion also changes how you use the language. You stop wanting to be ready. You accept that embarrassment is part of the process, and often a sign that learning is happening. The languages that have stayed with me weren't the languages I studied the most mechanically. They were the ones where something was at stake: connection with others, curiosity, survival, belonging. When emotion is involved, practice stops feeling like study. It starts feeling like participation. Number 3, repetition without boredom. Most people think fluency comes from learning more and more words. It doesn't. That's just part of it. Fluency comes from using the same words in different situations until they come out without effort. That part isn't exciting, but it works. Once you understand that, it changes how you study. Instead of constantly chasing new vocabulary, you slow down and work with a smaller set of words and sentences. You reuse them in different contexts. You say them out loud. You adapt them slightly, past, present, future, etc., until they feel natural. It also changes how you practice. You stop thinking of repetition as boredom, and you start thinking of it as building automaticity. Words and sentences automatically come to you fluently. And when you use the language in real life, you rely on what's already solid instead of reaching for something new and fragile. Fluency isn't always about how much you know. It's also about how easily what you know comes out when you need it. And number 4, speaking before you feel ready. There's a moment every language learner reaches when they think, I should be better than this now. That moment never really goes away. You don't eliminate it. You just learn to walk with it. Once you accept that, it changes how you practice. You stop waiting to feel really confident before you speak. You stop measuring yourself against some imaginary version of fluency or somebody else's fluency. Instead, you focus on participation, on staying in the conversation, even when your sentences are simple or imperfect. And just as importantly, you learn from the mistakes. You notice what caused you confusion, what you couldn't say, what you had to work around. That feedback shapes what you study next. Progress belongs to people who keep speaking, before they feel ready. And those who treat mistakes as information, feedback, not as failure. Fluency isn't the absence of mistakes. It's the ability to keep going and keep learning despite them. And last, and perhaps one of the most important ones, is identity shift. At some point, language learning stops being something you do and becomes part of who you are. To really learn a language well, you have to allow yourself to develop new linguistic and cultural identities. And importantly, these identities don't replace one another. They coexist. Over time, you build a kind of internal repertoire, different ways of speaking, reacting, and expressing yourself. And the appropriate ways of doing so comes to the forefront when you need it, when you're speaking that language. That actually makes switching between languages easier, not harder. You are not constantly translating or forcing yourself into a different mode. You're stepping into a familiar identity that already belongs to that language. When you allow that shift to happen, speaking feels more natural. You begin to sound more like a native speaker, not because you're imitating perfectly, because you're thinking and reacting within the language. This is something I've talked about in a number of other videos because it shows up again and again in real language learning and usage. The languages that have truly stayed with me were the ones where I stopped performing and started inhabiting the language. That ability to move between identities is one of the most powerful skills in language. Well, I hope you learned a lot from this. Thank you for listening, and see you in the next video.